Hello there. In this video I'm going to explain to you a number of different ways in which you can create pendants using Fluid Designer for 3D printing and the objects that we've created that can be used within Fluid Designer. And if I just click on the menu here, you can see I'm actually already in the Pendants folder. And if I just scroll down the folder, you can see there are lots and lots of objects here. And most of these objects are the same sort of thing. They can be manipulated in the same way that I'm going to show you in a few minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select one object, and in this case I'm going to select a Celtic knot pendant. So if I just drag and drop this object onto the workspace, and I'll just move that panel back slightly and just readjust it. So what have we got here? Well, we've got an object that could be sent directly to a 3D printer, and you could print this Celtic knot in silver or gold or plastic, whatever your choice is. And you could feed a chain through one of the gaps within the Celtic knot. So that's the first thing that to say. The second thing to say is that, well, if we're not so happy about the shape and the appearance of that, we can always change it. So if we just go over here, we can change it to a pendant cross-section 1 by 2 millimeters. So you can see there, that's changed the appearance of the Celtic knot. It's now 1 millimeter wide there and 2 millimeters deep. I could change it to 3 millimeters deep if I wanted, or I could go back to that kind of rounded cross-section. So there are various options available to us here. Personally, I think the nicest one is probably something like 1 by 2. So that gives you a reasonably good looking and a good shape for a pendant. Now this particular object is quite small. It's only about 12 millimeters across, so it's actually quite small. But if you decided you didn't want to put your chain through a hole in the pendant here, if you decided you wanted a connector on the end, that's easy enough to add. So if we just go to View and Top View, if I just go to File and Append, and if I just look through my menu system, I can find some connectors, and I'm going to add a connector with a 3 millimeter diameter hole. And so I just select the 3 millimeter diameter connector, and if I just zoom in now and just make sure I've got that highlighted, I can reposition that connector. And the first thing I want to do is to actually delete the solid feature of it, because as you can see it's not the same shape as my connector, and I want it the same shape, so I'm going to delete the outline of that. I'm just going to view it from the top again, and I'm also I'm going to change the length of this. I'm just going to delete a couple of what are called the control points at the end, just to make this shorter, and I'll reduce it down there. And now I'm just going to position it so that it's just touching my Celtic knot. Okay, I'll just zoom in and just check where it is. We're in tab view, that's in edit mode. You can see that it's just inside my Celtic knot there, just overlapping, which is what I want it to do. And so now what I can do is, if I've got this connector highlighted already, if I just hold down my shift key and highlight the Celtic knot itself, if I just go to Tools, and if I just join the two objects together, you'll see that my connector is now made the same thickness as my Celtic knot. So instead of putting the chain through a hole in the Celtic knot, I've got a connector at the end, and I could fit my chain through there. So that's one of the things that you could do, a couple of the things that you could do working with this particular pendant. Now if I just close that down and then just open it up again, this time without the connector, so I've just gone back to the Celtic knot as it stood originally. What else can we do with this object? Well, if I just open up this panel here, and if I just change this count value and I just zoom out so you can see what's happening, I'm creating a different type of pendant now with this Celtic knot. I'm creating this circular effect pendant. Now the actual size of this pendant it's about 30 millimeters across here, so it's still a reasonable size to be used as a pendant, although it's quite considerably bigger than before. But I can also change the appearance of this pendant just by changing the offset values here. I can create different types of pendant, different appearances, just by changing my offset value here. Now clearly once we go above 1, that's not going to be a pendant anymore. We can't print that as a single object, so you do need values which are less than 1. You do need some overlap so that you get a printable solid object. Now if you don't want a circular style, we can switch that off, and notice what happens there is our count counts 6 across in this case, so we can work across the screen here, and I've got 3 objects this time. And we can also actually put extra objects above, and again we can change the offset and get the pendant to overlap in different ways, and each time you get a different shaped pendant or a different shaped object. So you might, for example, want to bring that down to 1 wide and 3 tall, or even 4 tall if you wanted to. And so those are various options you've got with the setting the rows and setting the columns for this particular Celtic knot. I'm just going to set it back to 1 again, so I'm just going to enter 1 in there, go back to my original Celtic knot. Now again, there are still other things that we can do with this to get different effects, different types of pendant. If I go into edit mode now, and if I click on the part of the Celtic knot there, so I'm just highlighting one control point on the Celtic knot, and if I just pull this down now, and I'm just scrolling my mouse as well at the same time, you can see I can deform the Celtic knot, and what I'm doing, I'm getting a heart shape at the top of this Celtic knot, and I could drag this bottom bit down as well and exacerbate that. Okay, so I've changed my Celtic knot now into a heart shape, and again I could replicate that with my patterns that I've just been showing you to create different effects. So that's a completely different style of pendant than we've got now, just by editing the original shape. So that's another feature that's available in Fluid Designer, that you can edit the original shape as well, and you know, you can do this as much as you want, but obviously you do want to try and make it look attractive. Okay, so that's working with an object that's been predefined in Fluid Designer for 3D printing. So all of these objects here can be manipulated in a similar way to what we've just shown you. All of them, or almost all of them I should say. Now if I just go to the top of my Pendants panel, if I just choose one of the objects that's there, this is a 35mm pendant. If I just drag and drop that onto the workspace, now this works slightly differently in that what we've got here is we've got a predefined pendant, and this pendant is 35mm across. There are other options available here, and it's already got the connector at the end. But in the same way as what we've just shown you with the Celtic knot, you can actually change the dimensions here. So I could change it to a thickness of, say, 1mm by 1mm, so you can see it's not quite as deep now. Or I could change it back to 2 again, or to 3, or I could have it a rounded shape as well. Now I'm going to leave it at 1mm by 3mm at the moment. And if I just go to view and view it from the top again, and I'm just going to move this panel out of the way and just reposition it. Now what can we do with this? Well, if I click on one of these objects at the top here, this sort of square shape, if I just go to cursor and snap selection to cursor, what it'll do is it'll place it in the center of the screen, in the center of my pendant. If I choose a circle over here and just go to cursor and snap it, it will also place it in the center here. Similarly, if I select one of these half circles here and snap it, it'll place it there. Now I want to try and make sure I get some symmetry here, so I'm going to count these. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5 there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I want the 6th one, I think. and if I just snap that there, so that just makes it symmetrical. Now we can't print a pendant like this at the moment. For a start, these items in the middle have got no thickness, but they're also not touching the pendant on the outside. So one of the features of this particular thing is that we do need to have a line that goes to touch all the different objects in the middle plus the pendant itself. So if I just select that object there, you can see that that is now going through all of the previously placed objects, and it touches, which is important, the pendant on the outside. So how do we change this into a pendant that can be printed? Well, first of all, if I highlight each of these objects, and I'm just holding down the Shift key and highlighting each of the objects I've just placed there, first thing I want to do is to just join all of them together, and as you can see, it changes to yellow, so they're all one object now. And if I just highlight my pendant on the outside and just go to Tools, Object Tools, and join them, you can see there it is. I've created a pattern, okay, which fits inside my pendant, and I've just used these objects on the outside, so that can be sent to be 3D printed. And what this gives you is the facility to make lots and lots and lots of different styles. Now if you just close this down and go back, I can do it from the file menu. If I go back to the Celtic knot that I had before, if I open up that pendant, here's the Celtic knot that we had before. What we can also do here is that if I actually delete the solidness of this object and return it to just a curve, so there's my basic Celtic knot with no thickness applied to it. If I just save this, and I'm going to save it to the desktop, and I'm just going to rename that as curve, because that's essentially what I've got here. Okay, and if I then just go back to my 35mm pendant and just drag and drop that onto the workspace, one of the things that I can do is, in addition to dragging any of these objects into the center of my pendant, if I go to File and Append and go to the desktop, I can open up my Celtic knot and I can append that from the file, the Celtic knot file. Now you can see that the size isn't quite right, but that's not a problem. All we need to do is to press S on the keyboard and just scale it up until it's just about touching the pendant. Now at this point I do need to apply the scale, but with that knot highlighted, if I just select the outline of the pendant now and just join them together, boom, there we are. We've now got a Celtic knot inside a 35mm diameter pendant. So any of the objects that we've got out here, or almost any of these objects, they can be saved as curves and imported into the center of an outline of a pendant. Oh yeah, and one other thing that I should say is that in addition to kind of flat two-dimensional objects, so for example we were opening up this Celtic knot here, which is a flat shape, we do actually have three-dimensional objects as well here. So if I look at the Celtic knot, that's the Celtic knot that we've been opening a few times now. If I select the object next to it, which has almost got the same name except it's got 301 instead of 001, if I open up that object, you'll see that this is a Celtic knot, but this time it really is a Celtic knot in the sense that it's three-dimensional. And you can play around with this object in the same way that we've just done with the two-dimensional one. We can create multiple copies of it, in this case just 3. Okay, so I can rotate them around. I can create rows and columns of them as well. Okay, and I can also delete the outline of it and save that curve and import it as a three-dimensional shape this time into one of my outline pendants, like the 35mm one that I used before. So in addition to having kind of two-dimensional almost shapes, we can incorporate three-dimensional shapes in. Okay, so those are some of the things that you can do with Fluid Designer for 3D printing in terms of creating pendants. Thank you. Oh,